Okay, good day, students. Week 2 macroeconomics online. This week we focus on markets. So popular topic in economics and very important topic because we're going to expand from our study in chapter 3 of single markets to aggregate demand, aggregate supply later on in the term. So it's important to get this foundation now. It will definitely help you understand more later. Plus, this is one of the basic building blocks of economic thinking. So a rather important chapter here, a rather important chapter in chapter 3 and an important week's worth of learning. So I'm going to share my screen with everyone, meaning Angela. She's the only one who loves me. All right, so here we go. Share, there we go. So here's our week 2 under modules, and everything you need is in this document here. I'm gonna show you download this document. Right, so if you click on this and then sorry, it's a little slow. Come on, Pierce College, you can do it. All right, so when you download this document, the first page discusses first, what it is we're going to be doing this week. Then it outlines your learning opportunities. So obviously you can either participate in this live Zoom session or watch the recorded video, which is one way to learn the material. Definitely you can read the chapter and then attached to this document are not only the chapter, but the lecture notes. That specific tool is important this week, especially when learning the idea of market economics. The lecture notes attached to this file, right? It's very important that you review these. And then it says, review the economics of markets, the principles of demand and supply by thoroughly examining the example market scenarios on the week 2 document. So in addition to the lecture notes, I put together several pages, like 10, 12 pages of example questions and answers, which are vitally important for you to review, especially in preparation for the week 2 quiz. Right. And then we have these online instructional videos that if you care to take the time, you can review those as well. And there's links to those videos right here. All right. So what do you have to accomplish this week? Same 3 agenda items, same 3 academic exercises. Finish the week 2 Connect assignments, which challenge you to demonstrate an understanding of chapter 3 in the book. Then take the weekly quiz. Now for the weekly quiz, there is an example quiz, both attached to this file as part of this file, and it's also available on the week 2 quiz link in Canvas. So I strongly recommend that you download and review the week 2 example quiz prior to taking the week 2 quiz, because it shows you exactly how to tackle the 4 market scenarios on the week 2 quiz. If you follow along the examples in the week 2 example quiz, you will do well on the actual quiz. So it's vitally important for you to do that. And then you all have to participate in the week 2 discussion. Now, if you notice in week 2 discussion, the class has been divided, in half. All right, the class has been divided into 2 groups. So let me address that real quick. When you look in, let me close this. If you look on this week 2 page here, and it shows you the discussion, there are 2 groups, alphabetically, group 1 and group 2. So when you read these instructions, it tells you that you're going to be either part of group 1 or you're going to be part of group 2, and you're going to argue for one side of this market discussion. So you're going to read this article about what's going on with commercial office space, and then you're going to use the principles and concepts of market economics to debate what this company should do, this company that theoretically owns and operates and manages commercial real estate property. Should they continue in this realm, or should they dispense of a good deal of their property. So that's the debate for week 2. Now, of course, the article you need to read again is part of that document right here. It's a 1-page article, and it's part of the week 2 online document. You don't have to go searching for the article, it's right there for you. So those are the academic responsibilities for week 2. All right, so let's go into market economics. All right, Angela, you're going to be our participant today. Tell me something that people buy on a regular basis, or lots of people buy this on a regular basis. Give me an example of that.
Hello?
Lots of people buy something and they buy it on a regular basis.
Clothes.
Okay, clothes, very good, okay. So we can use that as an example, that'll be a perfect example. So then we look at any markets, right, what we do is we evaluate the buyers and the sellers in that market. And as economists, we're interested in what we call equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity in that market. So a market is an institution which brings together buyers and sellers. And for our study, we're going to assume that there's a large number of buyers and a large number of sellers. And that's an important assumption because we're going to assume that it's the interaction of buyers and sellers. It's the market action and activities of buyers and sellers that determine the outcome in the market. So here we have on our screen a supply and demand graph. So demand and supply and demand analyzes and demonstrates the behavior of sellers and buyers. And it helps us understand how we determine what the price and quantity is in the market. So a few things before we start. What are we measuring in any market? We're measuring equilibrium price, and that's on our vertical axis here. And we're measuring equilibrium quantity on the horizontal axis. So you mentioned clothes. So if we talk about clothes in general, in other words, how much does the average price of clothing in the United States? Well, we know who the demanders are in that market. There's millions of Americans. So this downward sloping red demand curve, that's going to represent the millions of Americans who buy clothes on a regular basis. And then the supply curve, that'll be all the producers and manufacturers of clothes, right? All the sellers of clothes. So what we're trying to determine here with our market analysis is what's the average price and the quantity of clothes. Now, this market graph will demonstrate a specific time. So in other words, this might be the market for clothes for this week or this month. So whenever we use the tools of demand and supply to analyze a market, we assume there is a specific time involved with that market. So the key idea here is we're interested in what's going on with the buyers and the sellers in the markets. And we're going to investigate their factors and habits to determine what we call equilibrium price and quantity. So the red downward sloping demand curve, that represents the buyers in a market. And the blue upward sloping supply curve, that represents the sellers. So we use the tools of demand and supply to determine what we call equilibrium price and quantity. Now, why is this important? Because here's what happens. After we figure out what is the equilibrium price and quantity using our market analysis, then we know that certain factors are going to affect the behaviors of buyers and or sellers, and that's going to ultimately change equilibrium price and quantity. So as economists, we're trying to make sense of that activity, right? So this is an important idea. You can't have a market unless you have both buyers and sellers. You need demand and supply to have a market. But unfortunately, we can't teach both of these at the same time. So we're gonna investigate demand, and then we're gonna investigate supply, and then we're gonna bring them back together, and we're gonna talk about a market and market equilibrium. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna go over a couple of example problems so students feel comfortable on using these market tools to analyze price and quantity and understand how we determine equilibrium and understand how equilibrium changes when factors in the market affect buyers and sellers. All right, so you don't have a market unless you have buyers and sellers. You can't have just demand or just supply. But again, we can't teach them at the same time. So we're gonna look at the demand side of the equation and then the supply side of the equation. Before we do that, a couple notes. Number one, like I said before, a market is an institution that brings together buyers and sellers. And for simplicity and for our big assumption at the beginning, we're going to assume there's a large number of buyers and a large number of sellers. Can you give me another table so I can see what about? Thanks. All right, another important idea. Generally speaking, there's three types of markets. Angela, the one you mentioned, clothes, that we would label in part of the product market. So in the product market, these are things that individuals or households are familiar with because we buy them all the time. It can be the market for clothes. It can be the market for corn. It can be the market for air conditioning repair service. Right? It can be the market for hardwood flooring in our houses. Right? It can be the market for bottled water. Right? So these are all the goods and services that people buy on a regular basis. All right. So in that type of market, what we call the product market, which are both products and services, the buyers are households and the sellers are businesses. The second type of market, which is important, is resource markets. So last week, when we did production possibility curve, when we studied the production possibilities frontier, we talked about land, capital, and labor. So there's a market for land, there's a market for labor, there's a market for capital. The important idea here is that in the market for resources, the situation flips. The buyers are businesses and the sellers are households. So those are the two types of markets we're most interested in. Now, technically speaking, in macroeconomics, there's one more type of market that we don't spend too much time on here, a little bit, but the market for financial instruments, the one that matters in macroeconomics, the one about currencies. So in Haiti, what is the money that Haitians use? What do they call it?
The goods.
Okay. So how do you say it again, my friend?
Good.
Okay. So how many dollars does $1 buys how many goods?
Oh, it's
Roughly.
very
Yeah,
around one to one. Hold on.
I'm getting it.
I mean, you can give me an estimate. I don't need the exact numbers. Like maybe $1 buys 6 of them or 8 of them or something, right? Right.
Around.
I can look it up as we're talking. Because now I'm kind of curious. Give me a second here. Take me 2 seconds to look this up. The Haitian dollar exchange rate.
Yeah.
All right, so it's geez. So $1 equals 149 gourds.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get rich if you go to take your dollars to Haiti. It just means things there cost more, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It's the basis. So when we study things like aggregate demand, and we talk about what might affect the total spending in the economy, and we look at how much exports foreigners might purchase, that's when the market for financial instruments, in this case, the exchange rate between currencies, the currency markets, become extremely important. But for this chapter, when we talk about single markets, we're going to concentrate on products and services, where the buyers are households and the sellers are businesses, and resource markets where the buyers are businesses and the sellers are households. Okay. So let's start our study of demand. We're gonna look at this real quick and then we're gonna come back to the slides. So we're gonna be looking at a downward sloping demand curve, which this just shows us the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So the downward sloping demand curve, this is the market demand for, in this case, the example in the textbook for corn. So there's literally millions of buyers because you have people that buy corn to put on their table. You have people that buy corn to make livestock feed for animals. You have people that buy corn to make high fructose corn sweetener, right? So there's lots and lots of uses. You have people that buy corn because it's an additive for lots of food items. So there's literally millions of buyers in the market for corn. And we're going to talk about the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So we're going to talk about that, the schedule of the various amounts of a good or service, in this case, a good, that buyers are willing and able to purchase a series of prices, specified amount of time. So that's what we mean here by what we call demand defined. Demand is, like I said, the various amounts of a good, in this case, corn, or a service that buyers are willing and able to purchase, series of prices, specified amount of time, other things equal. So it's just giving us this schedule and said, okay, for this week, if the price is $3, we would expect this much corn to be purchased. If the price is $2, we know there's going to be a little bit more corn purchased. So that's what demand is outlining for us. It's giving us, okay, this relationship between price and quantity demanded for a specific amount of time, right? So this is important when you talk about defining demand. It's not people might. When we say willing and able, we know that given a certain price, there's going to be a certain amount purchased. Now, you should know this when you go shopping. What happens when something goes down in price? Do you buy more or less of it?
More.
Correct, right? And when something goes up in price, we buy less of it. Economists call this the law of demand, this inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So as price goes down, quantity demanded increases, and as price rises, quantity demanded falls. So this is pretty much what we would say is the typical experience for all people. You buy more of something when the price goes down and less of something when the price goes up. So we call that the law of demand, the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Now, what is the reason for that? Well, the first one is just basic common sense, right? In other words, yeah, we know that when you go shopping and the price of socks goes down, I'm going to buy a couple more pair. Or when they go up, I'm going to buy a couple fewer pair. But the other three reasons are a little bit more technical from the economic standpoint. The first one is diminishing marginal utility. So, Angela, give me an example of something where, as you consume more of it, the happiness or satisfaction, the utility that you get from consuming it starts to go down, right? Think about things that you buy, things that you consume, where you're like, okay, the first unit was very satisfying. The second one may be pretty good, but after a while, you're like, I don't need as much of this. Give me an example of that. Can you think of an example?
I'm trying to think.
How about when you go get pizza? How many pieces of pizza do you usually like to eat? Like 2, like maybe
Two.
3, right? And you're like, man, the first piece when you're hungry is extremely satisfying. And the next one, yes, not as much as the first one, but yes. Then it gets to the point where as you consume more, the happiness or satisfaction you receive starts to dwindle. It's the same thing with going on vacation to play somewhere like Disney World. The first week you're there, you're overjoyed of so much fun. Right. The second week you're there, it's okay, it's still fun. But after a while, you want to go home, right? You miss your own bed and your routine and such. This is a common experience for human beings. As you consume more and more of a good or service, it yields less and less happiness, utility. Because of that, there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. All right. Now, the last two, the income effect and the substitution effect. The income effect is very simple to explain. All right, you go shopping, you're going to buy lunch meat, you're going to buy turkey lunch meat, and you have $20 ready to purchase lunch meat. and you go to the store expecting it to be $5 a pound. So obviously with $20, $5 a pound, you're going to be able to consume 4 pounds. But what happens when the price drops from $5 to $4 per pound? Well, obviously your limited or scarce income goes further. We call that the income effect. Price goes down, quantity demanded increases because your income now stretches further. Obviously, the opposite would happen when price goes up, your income purchases less, right? So for that reason, for the income effect, there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Finally, we have the substitution effect. Now, this doesn't apply all the time, but if there is a reasonable substitute where you would be reasonably satisfied with consuming one type of good in the place of something else. So go back to the lunch meat example. Say, okay, I was going to buy some turkey and some roast beef. Now I went to the store expecting turkey to be $5 per pound. If I get there and it's $4 per pound, other things equal, the price of roast beef hasn't changed. I'm going to substitute in more turkey because the price has gone down. All right. So for these reasons, the law of demand exists, this inverse relationship between price and supply and demand. So there's 2 ways to express the demand schedule. We can use the graph. Now remember, price of a good or service or resource is always, is always on the vertical axis, and quantity demand is always on the horizontal axis. So we can express this inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded graphically, or we can look at the numbers numerically, this table here. So this table here corresponds to this graph, right? At $1 per bushel, right? Consumers are willing and able to purchase 80 bushels. All right, so you get the idea here. Now, some students might say, well, does it matter if I draw a graph with a little bit of a curve to it, or I draw a graph with that straight? For macroeconomics, it doesn't really matter, right? If you were taking micro, we might be a little more concerned, especially when we start talking about elasticity of demand. But anyway, this is an important idea before we move forward. The market demand curve demonstrates the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. Again, if price goes down, quantity demanded will increase. If price goes up, quantity demanded will decrease. So a change in price causes what we call a change in quantity demanded, a movement along a single demand curve, right? So price is the most important determinant of quantity demanded. Price in the market goes down, there'll be an increase in quantity demanded. Price goes up, there'll be a decrease in quantity demanded. But economists say, well, what happens when something other than price changes? Okay, so we're no longer going to be examining a change in quantity demanded caused by a change in price. Now we're going to talk about a change in demand. In other words, when the entire curve shifts to the right or to the left. So we'll come back to these in a moment. I just want to show you. Instead of talking about a movement along a single demand curve, we're going to talk about the curve shifting, a rightward shift, aka an increase in demand, or a leftward shift, a decrease in demand. Anyway, what causes these increases or decreases in demand? There are, generally speaking, 5 non-price determinants of demand. So the things other than price, when something other than price changes, what causes the demand curve to increase or decrease, to shift to the right or shift to the left? And we call these the non-price determinants of demand, right? So these are the 5 that we're going to concentrate on. Taste and preferences, number of buyers, buyer's income, price of related goods, and then expectations. So we're going to discuss how they can either increase or decrease demand. Then when we're finished our entire study here in market economics, it's these non-price determinants that are going to help us make sense of the real world. Say, okay, what happens to equilibrium price or equilibrium quantity Well, when one of these factors changes demand, it's going to impact ultimately the price and quantity in the markets. So that's why these are important to understand as we go through this. So let's talk about the first two: taste and preferences and number of buyers. So let's go here and say, okay, this is the current market demand for corn. All right, well, what do we mean by taste and preferences? It means simply that an item, a good or a service, it becomes either more popular or it becomes less popular. People like it more, people like it less. The preference for it either increases or decreases. And this happens all the time. So if we read in the newspaper tomorrow morning that consuming corn reduces your chance of getting Alzheimer's by 20%, what would happen to the demand for corn? If you read in the paper like, geez, if you just consume more corn, you can actually decrease your chance of getting Alzheimer's by 1/5 or 20%. Well, people are going to say, man, I want to buy more corn. There would be an increase in the demand for corn, a rightward shift in the demand schedule. Right? Something other than price change. It's had nothing to do with the price of corn. This is a change in demand, no longer a change in quantity demanded, not a movement along a single demand curve, an entire new schedule of price and quantity. So something changes here. Corn is now good for you. It actually reduces your chance of getting Alzheimer's, increase in demand. But if we read another article that said, geez, corn actually increases your chance of cardiac disease by 35%, that would cause a decrease in demand. Right? So taste and preferences is very simple to explain. Things become more popular, things become less of a fad, things become more healthy, things become, just something that human beings like more. Right? That will alter demand. Number of buyers. So for the longest time, we had three types of participants in the market for corn. We had people like you and me that bought corn to put on our table. We had people that bought corn to make either high fructose corn syrup or food items. And then we had people that bought corn to make livestock feed. But all of a sudden, what happens when we introduce a whole new set of buyers? What happens when we're going to use corn for a type of fuel? So we can make ethanol, a biodiesel, biofuel from corn. We introduce more buyers into the market, there'll be a rightward shift in the demand for corn. And that was huge in 2004 when the price of gasoline had skyrocketed because oil had gone up in price. We had a whole bunch of I think down at 70, but we had a whole bunch of new participants in the markets. All these farmers were now selling corn to companies that wanted to take corn and make ethanol. But then when the price of gasoline came down, there was a decrease in the number of buyers, a leftward shift in the demand for corn. So these first two non-price determinants are pretty easy to explain: taste and preferences and number of buyers. The third one, buyer's income, right? This one's generally pretty easy to explain, but there's what we call an exception to the rule. So most of the time, when the buyers in the market have more money, more income, they buy more of most goods and services. But that's assuming we're analyzing what we call normal goods. So if you look underneath here, it says buyer's income, we're talking about normal versus inferior goods. So most goods are labeled what we call normal goods by economists. Normal goods, right? Now, we're not making a judgment about people. We're just trying to make sense of markets. There are certain goods or services that economists label inferior goods. And they would be things like retreaded tires or generic store brand items or used cars, right? Imitation crab meat. All of these are what we call inferior goods. Now, again, we're not judging people for buying them. We're just trying to make sense of markets. So let me use the graphs to explain what we mean by this. Most of the time, when we're talking about a market for a normal good, right, if there's a booming economy and people have more money to spend, right, wages are going up, there's going to be an increase in demand for most goods and services. During a recession, when people have less money to spend, there'll be a decrease in demand for most goods and services. This holds true except for when we're analyzing the market for an inferior good. So if we're looking at the market for used cars or retreaded tires or generic food items from store brands, right? When there's a recession, when buyers have less income, there's actually going to be an increase in demand for inferior goods. And when there's an increase in buyers' incomes, there'll be a decrease in demand for inferior goods. So that's the one caveat you have to be careful of. All right, now it's audience participation time, Angela. I want an example of both of these, right? So sorry to put you on the spot here, but I can't do all the work. So give me an example of a good that you would say there's a substitute. In other words, like, you might say, okay, rice and potatoes might be substitutes. All right. Give me an example of one of those where you say these two goods or these two services, they might be substitute goods. Where consumers might say, I would buy this or I could buy that. They're going to satisfy the same basic human need, kind of.
Juice and soda, maybe.
Okay. All right. Maybe coffee and tea, right?
Yeah.
And then we have goods that we call complementary goods. So you like your smartphone, but what really makes your smartphone interesting is the apps, right? So a smartphone and then the apps on the phones are what we call complementary goods. All right, tennis balls and tennis rackets, complementary goods, right? Skis and ski boots, complementary goods. These are goods and or services that we use in conjunction with each other. So we're going to analyze what we call price of related goods. So let's talk about a market for substitutes. Let's stick with my example, rice and potatoes. Assume we're analyzing the market for rice, right? And most people believe that rice and potatoes are substitutes. So they're both, you can get a starch from them. If we accept that as a tendency, a norm, a generalization, what happens in the market for rice if the price of potatoes goes up? Well, if these two are truly substitutes, when there's an increase in the price of the substitute good, there'll be an increase in demand for the other good. So if we're analyzing the market for rice and the price of potatoes goes up, there'll be an increase in demand for rice. Obviously, if we're analyzing the market for rice and there's a decrease in the price of potatoes, there's a decrease in demand for rice, right? Complementary goods, right? I know this from myself. I go through these things like water. Like, how many phone chargers do you have in your house? Because you always lose them, right? So when the price of smartphones went down because they used to be crazy expensive, there's an increase in the demand for complementary goods. All the accessories we need, whether it be that power cord to charge it or a case for your phone, right? A decrease in the price of a complementary good means an increase in the demand for that good that we use in conjunction with the other product, right? All right, last one is what we call expectations. Expectations about three things. Expectations about future product availability, expectations about future product price, and expectations about future income. So if we're analyzing a market, okay, let's assume this is the market for New automobiles. This is the market for new automobiles. And we think, consumers think that 6 months down the road, the price of automobiles will be lower than it is today. So most people, when they shop for a car, they don't need to purchase their car that morning or that afternoon or that evening. They start doing some research and they start thinking about their car getting older. Now, obviously, that's not always the case. Maybe your car got totaled in an accident, or maybe your transmission blew up and you had no choice. But most of the time, people think about buying a car, and it takes several weeks, if not months, to purchase a car. So what happens to the demand for automobiles today, new automobiles today, if consumers expect a lower price in the future? There's going to be a decrease in demand today. If consumers believe that there's going to be a lower price of automobiles in the future, there'll be a decrease in demand for automobiles today, right? Now, what about future product availability? What happens during a snowstorm when people think, oh my God, it's Snowmageddon, we're not going to be able to get milk and bread and eggs for a month, right? We know what happens, that based on the worry that products won't be available, there's an increase in demand and people rush to the stores and they buy up everything off the shelves, right? So based on the expectations of future product availability, if the expectation that goods or services might not be available in the near future, there'll be an increase in demand for today. So we got expectations about future availability and future price. Now we got to talk about the last one, expectations about future income. All right, so you work at a factory. There was 100 people working there, and now you're down to 67 people because of layoffs at the factory. And people that are still working there are definitely worried about their future income because economic conditions are such that there's a recession on the horizon. There's cutbacks. If that's the case, there's going to be a decrease in demand for many goods and services when buyers are worried about their future income and their future employment. All right, so we covered the 5 non-price determinants of demand. All right, we talked about the difference between a change in quantity demand caused by a movement along a single demand curve, and a change in demand caused by the non-price determinants. So this slide here gives you all 5 at one clip. So what slide number is this? This is slide number 13. So, what are you doing? Go away. So this is a really good slide to review because it gives you the 5 non-price determinants of demand on the right-hand side, the demand shifters. And you should be able to go through this and come up with examples for each of those various 5 non-price determinants of demand with the demand shifters. And you should be able to look at this graph and say, okay, assume we started D as in dummy for, in the middle. If something changes, will that cause demand to increase or will it cause demand to decrease? All right, so this is an important slide to familiarize yourself with. All right, so we did the buyer side of the equation. Now we have to talk about sellers. All right, we have to talk about supply. So this is going to sound, I would say, highly similar because the only thing we're going to change is a little bit of the wording when you talk about buyers versus sellers. So what is supply? It's the various amounts of a good or a service or a resource that sellers are willing and able to make available for sale, series of prices, specified amount of time. So let me say that again. What is supply? It's the various amounts of a good or service or a resource that sellers or producers are willing and able to make available for sale, series of prices, specified amount of time. All right, so we're going to look at this graphically right here and then talk about the law of supply. So you look at this upward sloping supply curve. Right? Obviously, we're gonna use the same ideas here. Price on the vertical, quantity is on the horizontal. That's always the way it's gonna be. So what this demonstrates to us is says, okay, how much will manufacturers, producers, sellers make available for sale at a certain price? Right? One important idea here, as a consumer, as a buyer, as a household member, as an individual, you're typically more familiar with price being an obstacle than you are it being a reward. And most of us don't own an oil field, and we're not selling a land resource. Right? Most of us aren't thinking about running a business and thinking about price as reward and not as an obstacle. So when you're studying supply, a good idea when you talk about how do I really understand the law of supply, I don't think of price as an obstacle, think of it as a reward. Put your mindset in that of the seller, the producer, and that will definitely help. So the law of supply says that other things equal, right? Other things equal, there's a direct relationship between price and quantity supply. Price goes up, producers, manufacturers, sellers, they want to make more for sale, more available for sale. When price goes down, the opposite is true. A decrease in price will decrease quantity supply, right? Okay. Just like we studied with demand, the most important determinant of quantity supply is the change in price. So a change in price does not cause the supply curve to shift to the right or shift to the left, to decrease or increase. A change in price causes a movement along a single supply curve. Right? Again, this direct relationship between price and quantity supply. So price up, quantity supply will increase. Price down, quantity supply will decrease. So then the economist says, okay, what if something other than price changes? All right, okay, well then we have to go to our 6 non-price determinants of demand, of supply. So there were 5 of them for demand, there's 6 of them for supply. So the supply shifters, same idea, we're just going to analyze 6 of them rather than 5 of them like we did for demand. But honestly, the first 4 are most important. So let me go through what these things are and then we'll look at them graphically. Resource prices. All right, you're a manufacturer, you're a producer, you're a business. You have to buy land, capital, and labor, right? So when the price of those resources, those inputs, those factors of production change, that's going to change the market supply curve. So if all manufacturers have to pay more for a resource, there's going to be a decrease in supply. If all manufacturers pay less for a resource, that'll be an increase, cause an increase in supply. All right, again, we'll look at this graphically in a few moments. I just want to go over these and what these things are. So resources are the factors of production or the economic inputs that manufacturers need to produce goods and services, land, capital, and labor. Right? And changes in the price of those resources will increase or decrease supply. Right? Technology. So most of the time, we have some advancement in technology that increases supply. So when you look at factor number 2 here, non-price determinant number 2, most of the time you're talking about, okay, the methodology to produce a good or service improves, therefore technology increased, therefore supply will shift to the right. However, we could talk about temporary disruptions of technology that would shift supply curve to the left. Right? Now, taxes and subsidies. Angela, which one of these are you more familiar with? Which one does everybody know about? Which one are people less schooled in? Do you know more about the word taxes or the word subsidies?
Taxes.
Yeah, everybody knows taxes, right? So this one's very simple when you talk about the supply side. If you want more of something, tax it less. If you want less of something, tax it more. So any increase in taxes on businesses will decrease supply. Any decrease in taxes will increase supply. That one's the easier one to talk about because students are familiar with taxes. They understand how it works. Right? The government taxes manufacturers of goods and services. If they increase the taxes, there'll be less output of that good or service. All right. The one that we're less familiar with is subsidies. All right. So you tell me, give me an example of an industry that when it first started off, it might have had some trouble existing because of the competition in that market. And without the help of the government, there's no real way that this industry would get off the ground. And when we think about in the long term, the social welfare benefit of having the government assist this industry, right? So what sort of fits that description where we want more manufacturing or production of a certain type of outputs, and we want that for the what we call the social good. The fact that if we have more of it available, there's going to be a lot of positive externalities associated with that. How about clean energy? Right? How about solar and wind energy? Right? But here's the problem. When solar energy started, it was woefully inefficient. And without subsidies, you can think of these as taxes in reverse. Without the government taking in tax revenues and then actually subsidizing the manufacturers of solar, the industry would never get off the ground. So the government uses this tool to alter market economics when they believe that more of a good or more of a service is best interest in how resources are allocated and society operates, right? Now, it doesn't have to be something overcomplicated either. We could talk about subsidies for community colleges that, over the, between, say, 1990 and 2016, there was an increase in the subsidies for community colleges. And then the government cut way back. And then what were the economic consequences of the government altering the level of subsidies? Right? All right, so you got resources, technology, taxes, and subsidies. This one's the easiest one, number of sellers. All right, in a market where it's very easy for producers to enter or exit the market, which we call barriers to entry. So something like, I don't know, corn farmer, right? Anybody can become a corn farmer. You want to try your hand at agriculture. You just have to buy a farm and plant corn, right? Obviously, there's more to it as far as doing it correctly and fertilizing and water and such. But there's very few barriers to entry. In other words, any Tom, Dick, or Harry can become a corn farmer, right? So economists are interested in saying, how will an increase or the decrease in the number of sellers ultimately impact the markets, right? So those are the four most important: resource prices, technology, tax and subsidies, and number of sellers. These last two are slightly less important when you talk about their actual application to what we're studying. Price expectations and price of other goods. I'm going to skip price expectations for a moment. I'm talking about prices of other goods. Wait, what happened to my little mouse? We're going to look at this one here, prices of other goods. So this last one here, price of other goods, this makes sense when a producer can easily shift between two types of manufacturing. So let's go to the graph to show you what I mean here. If we are a athletic, we'll call it manufacturer, we produce products related to sporting goods. So we're a sporting good company, and we could easily shift between basketballs or volleyballs. We could easily shift between basketballs and football. We could easily shift between basketballs and baseballs. So if that's the case, if the manufacturer can easily shift between two types of production, right? When one type of good becomes more popular, they'll just simply make more of that to make more revenue, right? Now, that doesn't work for most industries. You think like, okay, our company manufactures, balsa wood furniture. Well, you can't all of a sudden then become like, a company that produces or provides, air duct cleaning, right? So it only works if you're analyzing an industry or a market where it's rather easy for manufacturers to switch between two types of output. Now, the other one, price expectations. So for instance, if we own a farm and we think the price of soy is going to go up next year, we would plant more soy. If we thought the price of soy was going to go down, we would plant less of it. So let me go through this real quick as a review. Here are our 6 non-price determinants of supply. All right, let's go over technology, factors of production, aka resources, taxes and subsidies, and number of producers. So 1, 2, 3, and 5. Let's go over those because they're the most important. So if we look at our graph here and we say, okay, assume S is our starting point. An increase in supply is a rightward shift, a shift from S to S1. And a decrease in supply is a shift from S to S2. So assume we always start at S in the middle. All right, let's go through these again real quick. If there's a decrease in the price of factors of production, resources, inputs, manufacturers have to pay less for land capital and labor, there will be a rightward shift in supply from S to S1. If, on the other hand, manufacturers all have to pay more for resources, there'll be a leftward shift of supply from S to S2. All right. Now, one good thing to remember, it doesn't matter if you're talking about demand or supply, an increase will always be a rightward shift of either curve. A decrease will always be a leftward shift. All right, so trust that when you're going through these. All right. Second one, technology. Any improvement in technology will shift the curve to the right. So say, okay, we make something as simple as ceiling fans, and the machines that crank out our fans became 29% more efficient this year than last year. Right. Well, an increase in technology will shift the curve, the supply curve, from S to S1. All right. Now, again, there could be a temporary disruption in technology from S to S2. All right. Taxes and subsidies. All right, an increase in taxes will shift the curve to the left, S to S2. A decrease in taxes will shift the supply curve to the right, S to S1. All right, subsidies. The government increases subsidies to wind energy producers, rightward shift in that market of supply curve. The government cuts subsidies to community colleges. In that industry, leftward shifts of supply curve. All right. So we got number 1, number 2, number 3. Let's do number 5 real quick. Number of producers. So if we're analyzing the market for blueberry, the market for blueberries, and the market for blueberries has been crushing it. And it draws in more participants, more people want to plant and sell blueberries, right? So it'll be a rightward shift in the curve of supply. The entire number of blueberry farmers will shift from S to S1. Right. All right. Now we got to bring everything together, my friend. So look at the numbers for me here, Alex. All right, sorry, Angela, let me look at these for me, right? Look at the numbers here. Tell me what's going on if we say, okay, on the left, we have our market demand in red, the market demand for corn. On the right, we have our market supply of corn. Then we have prices from $1 through $5, potential prices. So at a price relatively high at 4, what is the market demand versus the market supply? All right, what is this? Is this an outcome that could hold equilibrium? Why or why not? Right. So if you look and say, what's going on at $4 per price of a bushel? So at $4 per price of a bushel of corn, market demand is only 4,000. Market supply is 10,000. So at $4 a bushel, we don't have equilibrium. Quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded. So this is going to incentivize these producers to lower their price to try and sell more. All right. Well, what about a price of $2? Right. At $2, buyers are real happy. They're ready, willing, and able to purchase a lot of corn, 11,000 bushels. But sellers, they're not so enthusiastic. They're willing and able to make available for sale only 4,000. So buyers are going to be bidding up the price because they see more utility in corn. So what's going on here is what we call the rationing function of prices, or what we call the invisible hand. As if led by an invisible hand, no government agency tells them what to do. We come to what we call equilibrium, right? In other words, buyers continue to increase their bids for corn until the utility or this total satisfaction runs its course. Sellers will raise the price, right? If they think that they can get away with that, and lower the price if they're feeling desperate about selling their good or service. So the rationing function of prices says that today, this week, the price of corn is $3 per bushel, and there's 7,000 bushels bought and sold. 7,000 bushels bought and sold. Now, before we go further, something very important here. Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, Invisible Hand, Rationing Function of Prices. Economists believe that $3 per bushel and 7,000 bushels bought and sold is what we would refer to as the most efficient outcome. Right? In the long run, we'd actually think that this would be most beneficial for society when you have a large number of buyers, large number of sellers, right? Because we achieve productive and allocative efficiency. This is, this is the good old-fashioned, we allocate this specific number of resources necessary to produce goods and services. And producers answer to the consumer sovereignty, right? So, one important idea here is that this doesn't mean everybody's happy, because at $4 per bushel, there were sellers who didn't sell their corn. At $2 per bushel, there were buyers who were still waiting for price to stay that low, and they didn't buy corn. So even though economists believe that $3 per bushel and 7,000 bushels bought and sold, right, is the most efficient outcome, it doesn't mean everyone's happy in the markets. So let's look at this graphically, right? This is what it would look like graphically. Right, there's our outcome. All right, hold on, let me just check time here. All right, 7:40. All right, okay. Before we talk about surpluses and shortages, which I want to do in a moment, I want to go over some of these problems so you are feeling good about how we use all this market analysis to analyze equilibrium and determine changes to price and quantity in the markets. So let me show you these graphs real quick. So there we go. So we start with any market and we say, what happens if this is the situation today? Price 1, quantity 1, a certain amount of buyers, millions of buyers, thousands of sellers, and here we have our equilibrium price and quantity. And we can say this is the market for something like bubble gum, right? This is the market for bubble gum. And all of a sudden, bubble gum becomes more popular with consumers. So this is our market equilibrium today. Certain price, certain quantity bought and sold, right? So, and then all of a sudden, bubble gum becomes far more popular with kids 5 to 50, right? So an increase in the taste and preferences for bubble gum would increase the demand, shift the demand curve to the right. Something other than price changed. Right? What happened was the taste and preference for bubble gum became greater. So a rightward shift in the demand curve ultimately changes equilibrium from E1 to E2. The rightward shift in the demand curve, the increase in demand, it caused price to increase and quantity to increase. So you see that here, Angela, where you say, okay, here's where we start off. We started at P1, Q1. We started at equilibrium 1. And then the taste and preferences for this good, or it could be a service, increases based on one of the 5 non-price determinants. And ultimately, that increase in demand shifts the demand curve to the right. All right. Now, let's go back to this document because it's vitally important for students to review this document in preparation for the quiz this week. And if you look on this document, right after the article that you have to read, again, it's only 1 page for set up your discussion, right? We're going to be talking about, let me just make this a little bit smaller. Yeah, there we go. Increases in demand, decrease in demand, increase in supply, and decrease in the supply. We're going to be talking about 4 different shifts of the curve, right? And how it affects equilibrium, price, and quantity. So what students need to become familiar with is say, okay, how do we use our non-price determinants of demand and supply to figure out what's going on in markets? And there are a whole slew of practice problems on this document. And it goes through, it says, okay, here we have B through G. And it asks you to analyze what's going on with the markets, what's going on with equilibrium, price, and quantity, and how does equilibrium, price, and quantity change when something affects either the habits of buyers or the habits of sellers. So that's what students need to become familiar with to get prepared for the quiz. Plus, it's just tremendous practical knowledge, economic knowledge, to become a better informed citizen on many issues when you talk about market economics. So, before we do this problems, I want to review the PowerPoint slides, bring up 1 more point. Then we're going to do a couple of these together so that students are familiar, or sorry, are comfortable with them. All right. So we just went over an example where there was an increase in demand. So what would cause a rightward shift in the demand curve? If we started at E1 with price in P1 and quantity Q1, what would cause the demand curve to shift to the right? So this is our equilibrium starting point today in any market. What would cause the demand curve to shift to the right? So from our non-price determinants, it would be an increase in taste and preferences, an increase in the number of buyers, an increase in buyers' income if we're analyzing a normal good, a decrease, an increase in demand if we're analyzing an inferior good and there's a decrease in buyers' income, right? If we're analyzing the market for a substitute product, okay, and there's a decrease, an increase in the price of a substitute, there'll be an increase in the demand for the other good. All right, complementary goods, if there's a decrease in the price of a complementary good, a rightward shift in demand. All right, if consumers expect prices to increase in the future, there'll be an increase in the demand today. If consumers expect more income in the future, there'll be an increase in demand for today. If consumers expect good or service not to be available in the future, there'll be an increase in the demand today. So that would all cause a rightward shift in demand, an increase in demand. What would cause a decrease in demand? Obviously, the opposite of all those factors, a decrease in taste and preferences, a decrease in the number of buyers. If buyers' income decreased, and then we're talking about a normal good, right, there'd be a decrease in demand. If buyers' incomes increase and we are analyzing the market for an inferior good, a decrease in demand, right? We talk about a substitute, right? The decrease in the price of a substitute will decrease demand for the other good, right? And then we talked about complementary goods. An increase in the price of a complement will decrease demand, right? And then the three factors affecting expectations. Supply. What will cause an increase in supply? A rightward shift. A decrease in the price of resources, a decrease in taxes, an increase in subsidies, an increase in the number of sellers, right? And an improvement in technology will all shift the supply curve to the right. Right? As far as a leftward shift to the curve, an increase in the price of resources, right? A decrease in the number of buyers, an increase in taxes, a decrease in subsidies, or a temporary disruption in technology will shift the curve to the left, the supply curve. Now, here's the only thing we haven't talked about. So we looked and said, okay, what happens when there's a change in demand or a change in supply? How will it affect price and quantity, right? What we need to talk about is what happens when we have what we call a complex case, where we analyze a market scenario and there's something that shifts the demand curve and something that affects supply at the same time. Right, so there's one of these on the quiz. I know because I made up the quiz. In that case, we talk about something new where either price or quantity will be what we call indeterminate. So if we have a market analysis, a market scenario where there's a factor affecting supply and a factor affecting demand at the same time, then we're going to have an indeterminate result. All right, so here's where I need your help, Angela. We're going to do these problems together. We're going to do a couple of these, and you're going to help me analyze these and get prepared for the quiz. So let's go back to these practice problems. All right, you can see this screen, right? You can see where it says B, thousands of businesses, right? Can you see that, right?
Yes.
All right, so you read the problem for me, and then I'll help you figure it out. So again, read that problem.
Thousands of businesses who rent commercial office space begin to question the necessity of having all employees work in a common location as the occupational.
Right, so that's exactly what the article's about that we're going to analyze from the Wall Street Journal this week for the discussion question. So all of a sudden, these companies are like, why do we need to send people to an office space? People can work from home, right? All right, so if that's the case, it's okay. As occupational efficiency of remote employees appears to maintain or exceed the level of desire obtained in the office. In simple English, people can work from home and get their job done as good as they were getting it done when they had to go to the office. So that's what we discovered during the pandemic. So that's what's going on. Now, here's what it says. How will this development affect the market for commercial real estate rental space? So when you think about this, if lots of businesses are deciding that they don't need to put people in office for work, how will this development affect the market for commercial real estate? You tell me.
The real estate will decrease.
Yeah, you tell again. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes, the real estate business is going to decrease.
Correct. So when we think about our market analysis, we're going to go up here to this graph and we're going to look at it and say, oops, sorry, a little too far. Darn it, this thing is so sensitive. All right, here we go. I'm just gonna make this a little bit smaller. There we go. So here's graph A that shows us an increase in demand and how that affects price and quantity. Graph B, a decrease in demand, how that affects price and quantity. Graph C, an increase in supply, right? And graph D, a decrease in supply and how that affects price and quantity. So here's what we have to determine, right? When we look at this market scenario, you nailed it on the head. You said there's going to be less demand for that particular service. So this graph here, B, that shows us a decrease in demand. So we started up here at this equilibrium where we had demand curve 1 and supply. And then we said, okay, what happened in that market? Well, according to our market analysis, there's a decrease in the number of buyers because there's lots of businesses that have determined they don't need to send their employees to an office. So when you have a decrease in the number of buyers, that creates a leftward shift in demand. And then how does that affect price and quantity? Well, price will come down and quantity will decrease. So when we look at this market scenarios, you have the answers down here, right? So we did it without looking at the answers, but we did it in 4 steps. We identified the markets. We said it's commercial real estate. We got that. And then you were correct. You said there's going to be a decrease in the preference, the taste, or the need for this. And that's going to decrease demand, right? So we go, first identify the markets, identify the non-price determinant, in this case, taste and preference. Now, you could say a decrease in the number of buyers as well. Either one would be correct, but they're both acceptable in this case. And that will decrease demand. But vitally important is what happened to equilibrium price and quantity. Don't do all the work and then forget to tell us what happened economically. So the result, the final result, we had equilibrium here. We had a demand for commercial real estate and a certain supply of commercial real estate. And then we said, man, there's a lot less demand. There's fewer buyers, or the taste and preferences for real estate decreased. Now here's our equilibrium at this new point. Price went down and quantity went down. So we look and say, here's our results. Decrease in price, decrease in quantity. And we leave it at that. We're all done, okay? So when you do these on the quiz, this is exactly how you're going to do them. Now, because you can't draw the graph, right? When you talk about this portion of the analysis, you can just say on the quiz, okay, what happened? Similar to graph B. Sorry, let me go down a teeny bit here. All right, so these are A, B, C, and D respectively, right? So when you take the quiz, you can say, oh, darn it, I'm sorry. There we go. Similar to graph B, right? A decrease in the number of buyers, decrease in demand, result price in the market down, quantity down, right? And you're done. All right, let's do another one. Let's do another. You did a good job with that one. Let's do this one. Let's do C. So can you read that? Is it too small, bud?
No, that's fine.
Okay, you read C.
Stay-at-home orders entice many Americans to order meal delivery. Thousands of traditional dine-in restaurants adopt delivery service during the pandemic in response to government mandates temporarily disallowing indoor patrons. How will these 2 developments affect the market for meal delivery?
Okay, now remember, I told you we might have a situation that affects demand and supply. So notice this one says, how will these 2 developments affect the market for delivery, right? So here's what's going on. You have better eyes than me. I gotta make this a little bit bigger, right? So this says, there we go. Stay-at-home orders entice many Americans to order meal delivery. So obviously that's going to affect demand because people will say, geez, I'm gonna order out for lots of meals, right? Thousands of traditional dine-in restaurants adopt delivery service. So we have two things going on. The first one is affecting demand. Americans order more meal delivery. The second one is going to affect supply when you have lots of restaurants that formerly didn't even think about offering delivery. They're going to offer delivery, right? So it says, how will these two developments affect the market for meal delivery, right? Now, obviously, we got the market. We know the market is meal delivery, right? That's going to be the markets. So we go down here, let's look at the answer and say, okay, we're going to cheat a little bit here, save a little bit of time. All right, first, there's an increase in the number of buyers or an increase in the preference for meal delivery. That's going to increase demand. That will drive price up and quantity increase. So we start here on our demand curve 1, and we have our supply. And what happened was lots more Americans are ordering meal delivery, right? So increased number of buyers or increase in taste and preferences, that shifts the demand curve to the right. And that causes price to increase and quantity to increase. But at the same time, restaurants are changing their behaviors, a factor that affects supply. So what happened with the supply side of the equation? All right, so it's still the meal delivery market, but there's going to be an increase in the number of sellers. Notice we start here at S1, and there's a rightward shift in supply, similar to our graph C up top there, right? All right, that increases supply. What happened to price and quantity? Well, because of the increase in supply, quantity went increase, but price went down, right? Quantity went increase, but price went down, right? So now we have to say, what happened altogether? Now remember, there's only one of these on the quiz, but you got to know how to do this. So we look at both of the scenarios in total. The increase in demand, that increased quantity and increased price. The increase in supply, it increased quantity and decreased price. So we know for certain quantity increased because both the increase in demand and the increase in supply caused quantity to increase. But price, we're not sure, because there could have been a huge increase in demand and only a small increase in supply. They could have been perfectly equal, whatever, so we're not 100% positive. So economists call this result indeterminate. We're positive that quantity increased, but price, we call this indeterminate. All right. So again, there's 4 market scenarios exactly like this on the quiz this week. One of them, you have to analyze a situation where there is a change in demand and a change in supply. All right, so it's almost 8 o'clock. I want to make certain students are aware of how to prepare for this quiz. So first, go through all of these practice scenarios. So you have from B all the way down to G. All right. So you have these scenarios to analyze, to practice, right? Which is a huge help because the ones on the quiz are exactly like that. But then if you go into the week 2 quiz, and this is on the week 2 document as well, but if you look at the week 2 quiz, it says here, practice quiz, right? So before you start the quiz, download this practice quiz, right? And then look it over, right? Because the questions are exactly like the ones on the quiz. It tells you exactly how to do them. All right, so this is really small. I'm gonna make this bigger. So it shows you like, okay, this is the question on the practice quiz. The FDA says it intends to take Juul cigarettes off the market in 1 month. There was actually talk about this, not that long ago. They were going to outlaw these things. So if that's the case, they're going to take Juul cigarettes off. How will this announcement by the FDA affect the market for Juul cigarettes? All right. Well, people are worried about the future product availability. If people say, oh, in a month, you're not going to be able to buy these things. Well, people are going to rush out and buy them now. So we're going to say that the market's obvious. That's the market for Juul cigarettes. There's a worry about future expectations about product availability. And just like graph A, there'll be an increase in demand. Now, what do I mean by graph A? Look on the first page. A is an increase in demand. B is a decrease in demand. C is an increase in supply. D is a decrease in supply. So when you use this, like, okay, I don't have to draw the graph. I just have to refer to those graphs up there. So the market's Juul cigarettes, right? There'll be an increase in demand because there's an increase that, geez, these products won't be available soon. So after we did the hard part, now we have to figure out the market results. The increase in demand, what does it do? It increases equilibrium price and it increases equilibrium quantity. All right, and then you're done. So the most important thing is make sure you include the results. All right, we identified the market, Juul cigarettes. We figured out that there'll be an increase in demand based on worry about the future availability of this product. That shifts the demand curve to the right, similar to graph A. And the result is increase in quantity, increase in price. All right. Now, question number 2. Let's do this one because this has two factors. So this one's a little more challenging. So if you can do this one, you're in really good shape for the quiz. So this says, okay, conditions are perfect in Iowa for growing red delicious apples. All right, so there's a tremendous growing season for red delicious apples. At the same time, red delicious apples become more popular with consumers. So we have 2 things affecting the market. One is going to affect supply, and one factor is going to affect demand. So let's analyze how this is going to totally impact the market when it's all said and done. All right. So here's what we figure out. First, we said, okay, the market's definitely red delicious apples, and there's a perfect growing season. So that's going to be an increase in the number of sellers because there's more available for sale. Right. So our A is, okay, the market's apples. I didn't put red delicious, but that's good enough. Right. And there's going to be an increase in the number of sellers. That's going to shift the supply curve to the right. Similar to graph C, a rightward shift in supply. All right, so we do this, 1, 2, 3, 4. First, the market's apples. Next, an increase in the number of sellers. Similar to graph C, an increase in supply. How does that affect price and quantity? Well, price will go down, quantity will go up. How do we know that? Well, let's look at this. Okay, in the market scenario, when there's an increase in supply, right, we start here, supply 1, demand, a rightward shift in supply. Look what happened to equilibrium price. Price went down, quantity increased. So that would be our result. But at the same time, we have something going on with demand. We know that at the same time there was a tremendous growing season, these apples became more popular with consumers. Okay, so what happens? All right, well, that's going to increase the preferences or the taste for red delicious apples. That's going to increase demand, similar to graph A. All right, so we look and say, okay, what happens in graph A? Well, okay, in graph A, rightward shift in demand causes price to go up and quantity to increase as well. Now we have to come up with, okay, what's the final result? So we have to compare both the change in supply and the change in demand. So we look and say, okay, the rightward shift in supply increased quantity and drove price down. The rightward shift in demand increased quantity and drove price up. So we know for certain that quantity increased because both the increase in demand and the increase in supply increased quantity. But price is going to be indeterminate because supply change, decreased price, demand change, increased price. So if you look on our answer key here, it tells us in scenario B, or I should say the second problem, I'm sorry. Final answer, results, quantity up, price, indeterminate. So if you go over these 4 practice market scenarios and you answer the quiz questions exactly like these are, right? The 4 steps: identify the markets, identify the non-price determinant of demand or supply, tell us whether supply or demand will increase, right? Tell us which one of the 4 graphs it's similar to, and then tell us what happens to market equilibrium, price, and quantity. Right, you'll do great on the quiz, right? So that is pretty much the wrap for this week. Right. Anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll be happy to help you with anything you need.